Hi, this is Roger DeMuth, and this is my step-by-step painting with watercolors demonstration. You can see me online at rogerdemuthwatercolors.com. And today I'm talking about a series of paintings I call Roadside Attractions. This is my studio, or part of the studio where I work, and it's got everything I need. There's a space to work at the bottom, watercolors on the right, gouache in the center, iPad, water dishes, etc. And this is the series I've started. It took me about a month to do 123 of these paintings. They're small. They're 6 by 8 inches approximately on arches, 300-pound watercolor paper. It's an alley in Utica. Isn't that pretty? And I've discovered that some of my winter scenes are some of the nicest ones I've done. This is a painting a sketch that I've done of near Hamilton, New York. I call the painting Near Hamilton. And this is a demo of start to finish of watercolors. I've sped it up a little bit, so I guess a lot, so that it doesn't get so long-winded. And I have my iPad on the left, a stack of sketches on the left, far left, and gouache at the top. And what I'm doing here is just working my way around the painting, adding quick, light washes throughout the painting. And I'm trying not to get too deep into the color at this point. And so it's a process. It's very light washes first, then build up with color. If I screw up, make mistakes, I have gouache to overpaint the watercolors, and so they work quite well together. This painting is, in the early stages, so I just have to lay out where all the color's going to be. And some of this will show up in at the final stage, but most of this has been going to be reworked several times. It's important that white become a part of the painting, and so whatever you do, or whatever I'm doing, I need to keep a little bit of flecks of white in it. I'll do some spattering towards the end, and as I get more intense here with the colors, you can see that I left some little holes in it. Some of them are for the details. There's white trim usually around a window in a white barn, in a red barn, and so it's an excuse to leave some holes. And I'll go over the whole painting at the end with gouache. Here I'm doing some of the detail work. I've started that. This barn has its cupola, which is quite nice, and there's not too many of them that are left. They usually tear off parts of them, and the cupola's first to go. And there's a little chicken house in the back there. In some ways, I could almost see this as a finished painting right now. That it's got nice light washes to it, not too much detail. I use my fingers to push the paint around a little bit. Here you can see that I've done some, really the washes look really nice, and not too much detail work. So it is possible that I could just leave this the way it is. And I've tried a series that has very, very little detail in it, and I thought they were some of my favorites, but I couldn't reproduce them so well. It's kind of a funny thing. They have very, very limited. It would be half the detail of this painting, and I've tried over and over and over and always failed. So, I guess if you're going to do something, you have to learn how to repeat it, and I haven't been able to do that. So these paintings are all for a book called Roadside Attractions, and the book is coming along. I've laid it all out. I've photographed everything. It's about 123 pages, 130 pages, somewhere in there. I'm not quite done with it, but it looks pretty good. And I wanted this video to be part of that book. So there'll be a QR code in the book that'll lead you right to the YouTube videos. And I do have, I think, 20 videos on YouTube of how I do my paintings and some of my ceramic work, etc. And so what I'm doing here now is just adding details to the painting. I'm using a liner brush. The liner brush is really, real fine point to it, and I'm not trying to be too uptight with it. I'm trying to be loose, and that's important, so that it just has a sense of freshness about it. Here I am taping down the painting to hold it in place, so I can, so the brush doesn't fuzz up on it. And I'm doing some of the detail work in the backgrounds, and I'm pretty quick with this anyway, but not as quick as this video is. It's sped up, I think, 8 times, so it's kind of a slower process than this is. So here I'm sharpening up the edges, doing the detail work, and putting the trees in the background, and I'll smear it with a little white towards the end in the background, white opaque, and that'll give it a little more sense of depth to the painting. I'm sharpening up the roadway, the mounded earth in the back of the barn, and then I'll do the chicken house in the back there too. And now I'm doing some of the edging, and it's reached a nice point now where there's a good sense of sharpness about it. And next I'm putting the boards on the barn and leaving those little white specks, very important. And the nice thing about watercolors is you can put it on kind of heavy, meaning darker, and it'll lighten up in a few minutes. So I'll go back to it and add, and I want some imperfections, so I'm doing that line work over the top of it, and I'll sharpen up the edges of the cupola next. And but it's coming along. These paintings typically take 2 to 3 hours each. I did about 4 in a day, and I kept up the pace, which is very difficult to do. And towards the end, after 100 paintings, you get a little tired of it. But it was for a book, and so I'm pleased with the results so far. So I've added the detail work on the top of the barn, the roof. It's a metal roof, and now I'm doing the stonework, and I'm trying to give it a little bit of the character of light and shadow on the stones, and there's some brush on the back of the barn that I've just added to it, and I'm using a little bit of gouache, and the gouache dries out very, very quickly, so every time you add gouache, you almost have to add water to it at the same time. Gouache is watercolors mixed with gum arabic and chalk. So it's pigment, chalk, and gum arabic, and that just holds it all together. And you can overpaint on it. It's an opaque watercolor. And here I'm painting, I'm not sure what kind of tree, but it has nice flowing branches on it. Here I'm doing some of the detail work on the barn. There's a rolling door on the side, and then a little window above it. And I'll start soon with adding a little bit more white, and I'm trying to get the stonework to have some imperfections to it also. And if I've gone put too much detail in it, or gone too light or dark, I'll lighten it up with the gouache. And the roadway is a general rule of thumb with me is I try to squash the roads a little bit. They're always too wide for my paintings, and no information in it. I've added the split rail fence now, and this whole composition and the whole scene, just the way it is quite quite beautiful. I'm talking about the photo of the farm itself. It's really a joy to work from. And I'm trying to get a little darker so it has some punch to it, and makes a big difference between the fence and the grass areas, and it has a nice sense of depth to it. So generally, in the foreground, darker colors, and lighter way in the background, and that's important. I don't always succeed with that, but and then shadows added towards the end that are that give it a sense of pop to it. If you really want your paintings to have more of a sense of photorealism, then adding black to the paintings is important, and you can see how that that rich dark blue green on the right is making the barn stand out, and it gives it more of a sense of three-dimensionality to the painting. So here I am just adding more branch work, and I'm trying to paint it as quick as I can too. I don't want to fuss with the details, and that's important, that it not look over labored. Let's see, this is white gouache now, and I'm doing the detail work on the barn, those beautiful 3 light windows over that door on the right, and or I guess that's a hay door, and where they could put the machinery that lifts the bales right into the barn. And people don't even use barns anymore like they used to. They use giant bags of, they look like big caterpillars sitting in the field. And it's airtight, and they can seal the food during the winter so they can feed the cows and it doesn't rot, I think. I'm not much of an expert on that. I guess I could cut it right there. But let's see. I'm working on the grass now. I'm being really kind of ratty with it. I'm doing the details on the edge, narrowing the road a bit, adding earth tones, grass, and browns to the painting. I'm using a slightly larger brush now, and these are Percy Baker brushes. I bought them 50 years ago, and they still work well. I did a few commissions when I was in high school. I got taken advantage of, I think, by the principal asked me for a painting for his office, which I did. Was happy to do it, you know, but Arches watercolor paper was $3 a sheet, and you know, he didn't even bother to say, would you like a few bucks for you know, doing the painting, or I should have been more aggressive, but he was the principal, you know. So you know, I guess people thought you could do paintings for people for free, and I've tried to dispel that myth ever since. Although bitterness is a great thing, and I've held on for 60 years and still, but he's probably gone by now. Anyway, I've gone a little bit too deep with my shadows, and so I'm lightening up some of the, so that shadow and that whole grass on the left side is too deep and too dark. And so I'm, right here I'm using a little bit of white opaque. I'm lightening the trees and giving it a little more depth to the background, lightening it so it pushes it way back. And then I'm scumbling the paint on and creating holes in the trees where the light comes through, and doing a little detail work around the telephone posts, and thinning them down a little bit. And I'll do that the same to this telephone pole too. I have to paint it a couple of times because it's the lower color, the watercolor in the background, works its way to the surface. So so that's important to learn that about gouache, and that it's you have to go over. It'll pull up the layer below it a little bit, not too much. And here I'm still softening the trees on the right side of the painting, and the painting's coming along pretty good right now, albeit the heavy shadow that I added too much grays and that black um, shadow. So what I'll do next is lighten the whole painting, which is the barn looks good. That whole area on the right is pretty fresh, and the cupola could use a little bit of sharpening at this point. And now I'm doing some of the loose road work and lightening up the tractor tires or the skid marks from wagons going by, and usually there's some great Amish farms around here, and their iron wheels leave a little bit of a mark on the road. So the barn in the background's coming along nicely, that little chicken house, and here's the dark in the window, and then I'll add some light around it later on. So the nice thing about the iPad next to me is I can see the detail, I can zoom in on it, and that's a great thing, that I can see into the dark areas. I can lighten that photo very easily, so I could see into the dark areas. And it's interesting to look at the detail here on the left in the photo. There's some wagon wheels I've left out, and but it's pretty accurate to the way the scene looks from the photograph. Here I'm spattering a little bit with use the liner brush for the spattering. I mix the white opaque with a little bit more water, so it kind of goes on, but then it disappears, so you barely notice it towards the end. But later on I'll use a slightly heavier gouache water mixture, and there's not much to see in a road, but I'm trying to make it as exciting as I can with that line work, and keeping it fresh. And it's fun for me to look back now at this photo on the left to see the way that shadow really does fall on the ground. Here I'm adding clapboards on the house, and it's an old house, could be late 1800s. It's an upright federal house, and with not too much detail to it, but does have a nice porch on it, and a lovely maple tree. They were usually sugar maples, and then there were a couple of spruce trees or white pines near these ancient houses. I'm trying to loosen up the shapes of the trees now that over that cast over the roadway, and now I've started to do some of the lightening of the darkest areas. That shadow is just way too deep for this painting, and I want it to have a little bit of a flow to the whole painting and not get distracted by the shadows. So I'm using a liner brush made by Princeton Brushes. They make excellent brushes that are, 50 years ago they were more expensive, and now these great brushes are made in India, and the Princeton Brush Company has really done a great job. I took my students to the Winsor & Newton factory in Harrow, England at one time many years ago, and I really wanted to go there to see how to make a brush. And they said, "Oh, we make all the brushes in Scotland." But there were two ladies that worked on the second floor of Winsor & Newton, and they painted all the sheets of paper to make all of the watercolor charts, and then they cut them into little squares and glued them down, and it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen, and they were just having such a blast working there. The company was bought, and the Museum of Art Supplies was, I don't know where it happened to it. I'd like to know, because they had a beautiful watercolor museum, and they let us took us through the factory to see the madder room where they made the pigments and the grinding of the pigments, and Oh, it was so awesome. I can't tell you. And but a company in France bought them and moved it all. All those jobs lost. So too bad. And so here I'm lightening up the painting even more, and I'm being kind of expressive with it. And if you push down on the handle of the brush, you can paint with the side of the brush, and it's not as accurate. And you can see how this is softening a little bit. Those harsh shadows have lightened up, and they're not distracting yet. But I'll still do quite a bit of work to this painting. I'll add the fence posts behind the barn, and it'll give it a little contrast between the fence posts and that dark green forest area of the painting. And I still have a lot of work to do on the left with the shadows, but I'll cover them up in a little bit. And I'm amazed how quickly I can paint here, and which is always kind of refreshing. I like it when the brush has that scumbled look to it, and the light is coming through it a little bit more, so that it appears like the shadow the gouache dries out, so I spray it with water. I just found a little spray bottle in the store, and when I'm doing some of this work, I don't have the time to keep dipping it in a bottle of water or my water trays. So the spray bottle comes in handy. Some people use that as a device to, when they start the paintings, to let the watercolor flow all over the sky area, and there's a few artists that I follow, and they're very fresh with their techniques. And so that shadow is being softened quite a bit, and I can be a little fresher with paint strokes, and really give it a little bit of punch to it now. So I've zoomed back on it so you can see me working on the gouache work, and watercolors are pretty much used mostly for the underpainting, but I may go back with it a little bit. And I found that a painting's never really done. You can keep working on it forever if you want to do, but there's a point where you just go, well, I think that's done. And I continue to lighten up the brushwork in the background and work my way around it. Give it some real bright light. Use the edge of the brush there. You can see how I'm flattening not working on the point, but on the side of the brush. And having it kind of loose and fresh is part of the game. So now that whole shadow on the left is much lighter. I'm brushing the pigment on in a real quick manner. I'm still using a little bit of watercolors, which is a more opaque, a transparent medium, and to do some of the detailing in it. But it's coming along pretty good now. There's always a stage in a painting where you want to throw it away. And I've learned that throwing it away earlier on saves a lot of time. When it really is a terrible painting, just chuck it out and move on. And what's left here is just a little bit more white work to lighten up the roadways. And quite often in a painting, when I'm working from photographs, I stitch them together and just cut most of the road away and get rid of it. Just move both sides of the road towards the center. And the roads are just too wide for my paintings anyway. There's a little town next to us called Morrisville, and the state has put a highway in that's 4 lanes plus an extra bike lane plus parking lanes, and you could land an airplane in that town. Nobody'd even notice. And but a narrow little road in the country with there's a few dirt roads around, not too many, and they're quite charming. So I think we're pretty close to the finish here. I might do a little more work on the cupola, I think. And here we go. And I screwed it up a little bit. It's not as accurate as I want it to be, and it's all right. And and I'll take a second look at all of these paintings before I scan them in. And most of that is done now, but I've retouched a few of them where I was unhappy with them. And laying out a 130-page book is quite a challenge. Even making a video has been quite a challenge that I've learned a lot. This is all done in iMovie. Lastly, I'll do a little bit of the super thin. I found that a pencil line makes a good telephone wire line, thinning up the thickness of the poles, and sometimes I go over them a little bit to push them way back with it just a little bit of weight on it. And here I'm lightening up some of the heavy work that I've done on the heavy painting work on the house on the left side. So, but back to videos, I use iMovie. It's an excellent program, really is. And I don't make that many, but I think there's 20 YouTube videos that I've done so far, and I'm getting a little bit better at it. But and here I'm spattering some of the painting and adding a little bit of that white that has been lost in the painting. And but back to the video, it's been a good learning experience for me, and kind of funny the way it goes together. Recording it has been interesting. I've made a bunch of blunders, tried to fix them, and scrapped it all and started over again. So this is my 6th or 7th time that I've been doing the voiceover. And pretty much lastly, I'm adding the blue shadows. I like to spatter my paintings with a color called Verditer, and it's a watercolor, and it's a lovely, lovely blue. This looks like it's got a little ultramarine blue in it, and I probably added a little too much, but it just softens the painting quite a bit. And look at that, sharpening up the edges here with white opaque, spattering it with white. Very important to give it that imperfection to it, and so you don't want to be too perfect, or I don't want to be anyway. And these are watercolors. They're paintings. They're not photographs. And everybody has a camera now, so it's easy to take lovely photos. And looks like I'm giving up on this. I can't believe it. And lastly, I'm signing my name, and the name is near Hamilton. And Hamilton's a great college town, and just a lovely place. So here's the final painting, Farm Near Hamilton, part of the book Roadside Attractions. And here are the 123 paintings that I did in a month. And my eyes look a little glazed over from it. In my hand is a book dummy, the cover. It'll look like something like that. So come and see me. I'm at DeMuth watercolors.com. This is our house where we live. And search for me on YouTube. Thanks so much.